Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com. And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 103. Coupling with Sherlock Holmes, Al and Julie Rosenblatt.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street Irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
And the time is approximately, absolute the best time to be joining us here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895.
Yes.
I'm Scott Monty.
Yes, you are Scott Monty, and I'm Burt Wolder.
How about that? You're sticking to your story.
I am. You know, it's taken so long, so many years, so much surgery, the wardrobe, that carefully crafted background. It's not easy being a sleeper agent. And never mind.
Well, you look great, and you don't even smell like formaldehyde. So that's the big benefit here, right? There you go.
Yes, there you go.
There you go.
There you go again.
Here we go. Here we go again. Well, we have a wonderful show lined up this time around, and we'll be getting to that in just a moment. But before we do, we actually have some listener comments.
Oh, we do, don't we?
Remember we have listeners?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
I know. As much as it seems like we just do the show for us, there are a couple of listeners out there.
Well, thank goodness.
And both of them sent us messages this time around.
Oh, excellent.
Hi, this is Danielle. I'm really liking the canon stories. I'm finding a lot of really interesting lessons in the story, and I don't know if it has to be a good podcast edition. Lessons in the stories. I was like reading the Copper Beeches and Copper Beeches, and you could probably think Speckle Band might have a lesson in there too. I read the Copper Beeches, and I also thought in the Grenades here, and I'm thinking like, this is good. It's like she saved a life. I'm thinking. I'm also, because I know Doyle didn't really like Sherlock in the end, but I'm also kind of wondering if you ever realized some of the stories may have saved a life. Like, if you look at Copper Beeches, and it's like you got a poor girl being locked up by her crazed, deranged parents, and her little half-brother who's also obviously deranged. I'm sorry, cockroaches? He smashes cockroaches for fun. That's crazy. And imagine somebody picking that story up and going like, I know a friend or a family member that's being hurt. I need to speak up and say something. It's sort of like, wow. It's like, Mr. Dill, you just tell somebody something and speak up. If someone's being hurt, you should speak up and not be afraid to say something. Of course, there's not going to be a Sherlock to help you, but a friend, you go send a family member, and hey, this person's being hurt. I need help. I don't know what to do. So it's kind of like, that's what I thought. I thought, wow, you can kind of pick up that little lesson. I don't know if anyone else has read that, but that's how I got it. But I just wanted to leave another voicemail about what I thought about the canon started. I'm I'm loving them. I've got the documentation with Clive and Michael, the one with Bert Coles, and if Bert is listening, they did a great job. I mean, there's like parts that are like, I was listening to Naval Treaty at the end when Holmes is threatening that guy who stole the treaty. He's like, I was like so scared. Wow. Okay, bye and have a nice day.
Hello, I hear of Sherlock everywhere, also known as Scott and Bert. This is Dave Schlom, host of Blue Dot, the ever-so-fun science interview podcast and radio program on North State Public Radio in Northern California. On my most recent interview, I spoke with Kenneth Willerford. He's from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, and he's the Deputy Project Scientist for Mars Rover 2020. Two of the instruments he told me about to be on board might be of interest to you and your listeners. The first is called the Scanning Habitable Environments with Raman and Luminescence for Organics and Chemicals instrument, or Sherlock, without a K. It's designed for the detection, yes, it will be a great detective on Mars, searching for signs of carbon compounds that are the basis for life by shining an ultraviolet laser on them. They like fluoresce or glow at specific frequencies, and that'll allow scientists to search for signatures of carbon compounds that are evidence that Mars once had life. The other instrument that will work hand in hand with Sherlock is the Wide-Angle Topographic Sensor for Operations and Engineering. You guessed it, Watson. Think of it as a really fancy magnifying glass to look for evidence of past life on Mars. So there are some pretty Sherlockian engineers at NASA JPL naming these amazing instruments that will be deployed in the greatest mystery of all time. Is there life beyond Earth? Ken was a bit mystified, though, when I pointed out that Holmes had about zero interest and knowledge of astronomy, and that in the study in Scarlet, Watson reveals that Holmes believed in a geocentric solar system. But maybe Franklin straightened him out when looking for things on the moor. Hey, I love your show. Keep it up, and thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Well, always fascinating to hear from our listeners. And if you would like to join those fine folks by sending us an audio comment, you feel free to take that smartphone out of your hand and put it up to your ear.
Wow.
Before you do, you have to punch in a couple of numbers, a series of numbers.
Good God.
Starting with 7.
Oh, no.
Followed by 7, 4, 221, 7323.
Bingo.
There you go. And in order to remember those last 4 numbers, because I know once you get to numbers 7 through 10 in a 10 number series there, it's difficult to remember. 774221, read. How about that?
That's excellent. Now, what is that in base 8?
I'm at a loss. I can tell you in degrees Kelvin. With that.
Yes, please. Metrically, what is that?
-10.
Oh.
Yeah. But in email, it's comment at ihearofsherlock.com.
Oh, that's a lot simpler.
Right. And on Facebook, on Twitter, you can reach us at I Hear of Sherlock. You know, wherever you find us on the social networks, I Hear of Sherlock. Because we couldn't fit in I Hear of Sherlock everywhere in all of those URLs. So,
well, everywhere is such a big place.
I know, and you can't stop looking.
No,
you can't stop looking. So, that being said, we probably have to pay a bill before we get to Al and Julie, don't we?
We do. We love great stories, like the tale of Beowulf, the heroic prince who battled the fierce, man-eating monster Grendel, a story preserved from the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex. This rich heritage of preserving great stories continues today at the Wessex Press, in Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle, and the Bookman. edited and annotated by S.E. Dollinger and Leslie S. Klinger. This treasure trove of Sherlockian history tracks the canon from 1895 to 1933 as it was being written and is only $29.95. The night sky is an ideogram, a card punched with holes from the world of what's to come. In this impermanent sphere, reach for the pleasure only a volume from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today.
So as part of our conversations here, we always get an opportunity to sit down with some really interesting people. And let me tell you, there are probably more people on our interesting people list that we are interested in, as the interesting people interested list. And they're interested too. So it's just compounding interest, as you can hear. One pair of them, each is individually interesting, but together they are fascinating. And that brings us to Al and Julie Rosenblatt. Each is a member of the BSI, and you may recall hearing Julie's name before in episode 89, because she was part of the inaugural class of women who were given investitures in the Baker Street Irregulars in January of 1991. Al had been a member of the BSI for many, many years prior to that, but the two of them together have always been a sparking plug in the national and the New York scene, certainly. And you'll hear about a series of events that they managed to completely develop and execute for many years to great acclaim at the Culinary Institute of America. We're going to get with them in more depth on that. And they also have produced a Sherlockian progeny, Betsy Rosenblatt, who you've also heard on this show. So really, Sherlock Holmes is a family affair when it comes to the Rosenblatts. So we took the opportunity to visit them at their family estate in upstate New York and have a wonderful, wide-ranging conversation with them. And I began by asking them, how did you first meet Sherlock Holmes?
Well, I was introduced to Sherlock Holmes, I guess when I was in 5th grade. I used to walk to school with a girl named Margie. And Margie told me about this wonderful character, Sherlock Holmes. And it really piqued my interest. But Margie had a habit of making things up. So I wasn't too sure about this.
That is very funny.
Have you heard this before?
No, but the business about Margie making things up, that's so funny in this context.
But we Sherlockians would never do such a thing, right?
You mean, did it really exist? And she's trying to tell you that she really... That is very funny.
She was a plant by the Baker Street Irregulars.
But anyway, I really didn't follow up this interest until after I met Al. And we had an encounter at Reichenbach Falls that I said, oh my goodness, I really have to follow up this interest. We were in Switzerland looking for a place to ski but everything was enshrouded in fog.
Okay.
So we happened to drive through Meiringen, and suddenly Al was at the wheel, and he stopped so suddenly I almost went through the windshield, except for seatbelts. And he looked, he said, that's Reichenbach Falls! That's Reichenbach Falls! I said, anything that exciting, I really have to follow up on this interest. Now it's your turn.
Well, I had a faint familiarity with Holmes, like everyone else. Or like most people, I'd read the stories. I was enchanted by them, but I can't say that it played any measurable part of my life or even my literary interest. I knew the stories. I came to enjoy Sherlock Holmes, and it was part of a larger array of literary figures and so forth. And I had assumed that Reichenbach Falls was a place that was made up by Doyle. But as we were driving through Switzerland looking for snow and for a ski area, I saw the sign Reichenbach Falls, and I said, my goodness, Julie, this really exists. There is a Reichenbach Falls. That came as a jolt and as a real revelation. And then when we went there, then we sort of took on the idea of Holmes and life and death of Sherlock Holmes and the like. But it was on that trip. That would have been right around 72, maybe.
72.
72. We're now in 2016, so that's, my goodness. Oh, my. Look at where we are now.
Yeah, right. That's 44 years ago.
Yes.
Amazing. So the two of you were married at the time when you were on this trip?
Yes,
yeah.
we were married. We were married in 1970.
Okay.
And I guess that was when we just both got bitten by the bug and became Sherlockians.
So when we had encountered the Reichenbach Falls, it generated a really special interest because Reichenbach Falls existed, and then we went to a local art store, antique store, and we're looking for etchings of the Reichenbach Falls, and we found one of the Reichenbach Falls, and it became a real treasure because it merged the existence of the real Reichenbach Falls with these earlier stories. And then when we went back home, I realized that there's a group called the Baker Street Irregulars. I thought that that's what they were called, and I sort of somehow vaguely believed that they existed because they were aficionados of Sherlock Holmes. So I wrote a letter to somebody who I learned was the head of the Baker Street Irregulars, all excited, and a copy of the image of the Reichenbach Falls, as if what is new to me should somehow be new to like the likes of Julian Wolfe. But he didn't write back and say, hey, you dope, we've known everything you've known for a very long time. He wrote back a very gracious letter. And it stirred up a little bit of a correspondence leading to a dinner invitation within, I guess, a year or two later.
Yeah, a year later. Yeah.
And how did the two of you meet to begin with? This predates your mutual love of Sherlock Holmes. How did you get together?
That could lead to a story that would be podcast length in itself. But let's suffice it to say we met in 1968 at a Republican Party victory celebration when Nixon was elected. The Nixon part wasn't as important as Al's boss in the district attorney's office was elected to family court, and there was a vacancy, would be a vacancy for district attorney. So our courtship was his campaign for district attorney.
Okay.
And if I tell you more, it could be a whole hour.
It's going to be diverting. Right.
So I piqued people's interest and said,
right,
perhaps the subsequent events were one of the things that led to the downfall of the Nixon government. Okay?
That's all right.
No more. We'll tell more, more. Let people wonder.
A tale for which the world is not yet prepared.
Right.
Very good. So what did each of you do for work before you retired?
Okay, I was a professor at Vassar College.
And what did you teach?
I taught psychology. And then I left teaching to become a full-time mother. And then I went back and taught a course in the life and time of Sherlock Holmes.
Go figure.
Go figure.
At Vassar College, she did a not a debut, but an encore in the Department of Victorian Studies, of one semester course. Beth Darlington, not of the Darlington substitution scandal, but Beth Darlington was head of the Victorian Studies Department at Vassar College, and loved the idea of Julie doing a course on the life and times of Sherlock Holmes. So that was her debut there. That was about 1990, perhaps.
Okay.
Yes, 89, 90.
All right. Yeah. Again at Vassar. I'm not retired, Scott. I had been on the bench for a long time, and now I'm teaching law at NYU Law School, and I'm doing legal work in the nature of arbitrations and mediations. So I'm still at it. I'm not going 110%, but life is still pretty busy professionally in that sense.
Yeah. Now, it sounds like Julie was able to pull together her love of Sherlock Holmes and her ability to teach. What about you? Did you pull together Sherlock Holmes and the law in any meaningful kind of way?
I'd always been tempted to bring in Sherlock, but resisted the temptation because there's only a certain measure of jocularity that you can import into your writings and decisions and into the courtroom. When it seemed apt, I did bring in Sherlock. And as a matter of fact, in one of the decisions that I wrote, I had a footnote about Sherlock. But it was rather distinct. My professional career was rather distinct. Even though I wrote some articles, some sort of popular articles or maybe legal articles involving Sherlock Holmes, but I didn't feel as though I want to indulge myself to the point of introducing him too far into the courtroom.
Right. You may remember Dave Gellerstein.
Yeah, right. Yes, that's
he led a group called the Retired Colormen, a retired men, and every so often they would go to hear the arguments in court. And from the bench, Al would always make sure to have some Sherlockian reference.
Okay.
Right. Everybody would wonder why these elderly gentlemen sitting there would be chuckling.
Irv Camel was part of that group, and I know these guys.
They're your groupies.
Yeah, they were. Well, they loved to watch the appeals, and I was on the appeals court at the time, so they would come and sit in the front row, a jolly group of guys, and then we'd have lunch together or breakfast. And they're sitting there avidly listening because they're worldly people and they enjoyed listening to the appeals and they liked the idea that, their friend Al was on the bench,
sure,
as one of, 5 or 7 judges. And I would egg them on. And as one of the lawyers was making the presentation, and I needed more facts, let's say, I would say something like, data, I need data. And they would look in the front row, and my colleague Neil O'Brien would lean over to me and they'd say, what are these guys? What is so funny?
What's so funny?
Yeah. And I'd say something like, well, now you've eliminated the improbable. I just put in a few morsels like that, and they would be in an uproar. That's about as far as I injected it.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great, though.
Yeah.
So, the two of you have one child, Betsy.
Yes, we do. Yes.
Betsy's been on the show before, talking about the whole free Sherlock movement that she was actively involved in as a lawyer, law professor herself.
Yeah.
Right. Does it get any better than this? Not only having a daughter who follows in your one of your careers, well, both of your careers, really. She's combined both, but who's also one of the most avid and well-read and respected Sherlockians out there.
Yes. You can't
get any better.
I proudly say that I think she's surpassed us. It's a blessing, yes.
That's wonderful. So, did Betsy know that she was going to be a Sherlockian?
I guess like with anybody else, it just happened. Can't explain how. We didn't direct this or try to make it happen. It just happened. And she also wrote an article for the Baker Street Journal. She said on our way to skiing, which is another shared interest, she would sit in the back seat with this purple volume of Sherlock Holmes and read the stories.
Yeah, so she took on an interest. It was sort of in the air, like many other things in many households. It's in the air, and you don't have to or particularly want to incite enthusiasm, but it's sort of in the air, and she enjoyed it. I'm guessing that if one has, 10 kids, 3 or 4 of them might like this side of your family life and reject other sides because everyone is different. Mm-hmm. But she took to it nicely. And when we traveled, for example, let's say we'd go to New York to the Baker Street weekend. So that would have been 74. She was born in 73. So in 74, we were already going to the BSI dinners. And by the time she was a toddler, we would take her to New York and make arrangements or whatever. But she began to travel a little bit in Sherlockian circles because being a small family, we'd go around together. She started forming her own friendships. And long before she became my partner on the Saturday afternoon yearly verse, she'd watch me do the verse the night before, and I would begin saying something like, Betsy, what's a good rhyme for such and such? You know, and she'd poke in a word here and there. And then little by little, she contributed more and more until we reached the point where she was pretty much a full-scale partner in this.
Can I tell the story about how this happened? Al was in Albany, and I showed her what Al had written. And she said, I can do this. So she wrote a few verses. And so she was reading it back to her dad. And he said, but I didn't write that. She says, I know, I did. And from then on, she was a partner.
That's amazing. So, I love the idea of this partnership because, from my first BSI weekend, I enjoyed the summary in verse that you've done at the cocktail party on Saturday afternoon. And for those listening, if you haven't heard it, you can certainly read about it in the spring issue of the Baker Street Journal every year. The poem, the verse, is published in full. It's not quite the same as being there and feeling the joy and hearing the laughter and all that.
Right.
And
plus, we leave out a few lines that are rather more, that might not be tolerable in print.
Of course. Discretion. Understood.
Right.
So when you and Betsy started partnering on this, which had to be like at least 10 or so years ago, right?
Exactly so.
Okay.
So more than 10, yeah, because you've been
probably
retired.
12 years, we're guessing.
Did you ever find yourself, I mean, she's obviously a great contributor. She fills in a lot of the gaps, and the two of you work extraordinarily well together. But have you ever found yourselves editing each other? And seeing a verse and saying, that doesn't really work. I've got a better way to phrase it.
Oh, my. It's a mix of, it is not unalloyed joy. When you have a partner in anything, there's going to be a lot of fun contributing, but not that it's anything like Gilbert and Sullivan, we're not as pretentious as that, to think of ourselves in that way. But when you have two people struggling over a verse and maybe a semicolon and a comma and shaded or ambiguous words, or words that get shaped with certain kind of coloration, we debate a lot and discuss it and back and forth. I would say there are some words or phrases that we probably spent a half hour adjudicating as to what's the best. I'm not kidding.
As somebody who's witnessed this process, I would say, each of them will write a verse. The final verse is edited by the other. So of course they edit.
It's a real collaboration. Yeah.
It really is. It's a total unified collaboration, such that I don't even think that at this point you can say, well, she wrote this stanza, I wrote that stanza, because every word was collaborative and agreed upon.
Yeah.
And negotiated.
That's wonderful.
Negotiated.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, well, I should tell you, it can get a little tense at times because we all have our...
It's a good thing you're related.
But I can give them a gentleman.
Or she said, Dad, are you going to say that? Or I said, Betsy, that's a little bit over the line. And she says, no, it isn't.
That's wonderful. So the two of you, as distinct and unique Sherlockians in your own right, I would imagine you brought with you your own particular focus or interest in Sherlock Holmes. Would you say there's a delineation between your interests?
It's sort of like Venn diagrams.
Okay.
Some things are unique to us, and then some things overlap.
What would you say the most common interests are between the two of you with Sherlock Holmes?
Wow, that is hard to say. Because we don't see distinct spheres. We just sort of share the interest and bring them together. So there isn't anything that he's interested that I'm not interested in, or anything that I'm interested that he's not interested in. Yeah.
I think for both of us, it's the romance of the gaslit streets illusion that probably attracts us both. But Julie really got into the culinary realm with Fritz, and I think she's known as the writer of Dining with Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
I had nothing to do with that book other than being the recipient of a lot of meals that she and Fritz cooked up here, and I would be the most gracious, gratified guinea pig ever, with that kind of culinary standard. So I enjoyed that, but I think Julie's known for her book, to which I really didn't contribute much except maybe look at a word here and there. But it's her work, and I think that's really her segment.
Yeah. Well, and
I think it is, yeah.
Where did the idea for that come from?
We were sitting around a cheery fire here, and like most Sherlockians, we love food. We said, wouldn't it be fun to have a meal time that would be like what Holmes and Watson would have had? Again, we love creating this romantic atmosphere. And just that time, the Culinary Institute had moved to town, to Hyde Park.
Of course.
And so Al placed a call to them. Could they do such a thing? What chefs would be interested in it? And they said, yes, we would be interested in, and that's how we met Fritz Sonnenschmidt.
And did he volunteer? Did he raise his hand and say, this is...
Well, the president of the CIA recommended him, and he was enthusiastic about doing this.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot about cooking. He learned a lot about Sherlock Holmes.
Scott, you'd been to the CIA. Had you been to any of those dinners?
No, I haven't.
Well, yeah, they were quite extraordinary.
How often did you do them?
We'll give you some menus so you'll get an idea of how grandiose. Roughly.
Approximately, but not precisely, every 5 years.
Every 5 years, okay. And the first one was what year?
1974.
74, wow.
It was actually in noontime, or in the afternoon.
So this is interesting, because you had this epiphany in Switzerland
yes.
in 1972. And just 2 years later, you were whipping up this extraordinary event.
Yes.
That is still legendary in Sherlockian circles for those who know it.
Yes.
That's amazing. 2 years, boom.
Well, I think that really launched us into the Sherlock world, because we saw a connection between Sherlock and the culinary realm. So I asked Julian how he would like the idea of our doing a meal put on by some of the great chefs of the world, and Julian loved the idea. So we set it out. I'll show you some of the original menus. It started, I think maybe, it started with some rather large ideas. Making up a menu. Julie went through the canon. We both went through the canon, and we picked out a dozen or so foods. And we went up to the CIA and spoke to the president of the CIA and said, do you think you folks would relish something like this? And he, being imaginative and interesting, said, yeah, well, I think we can do this. When you think about, the oysters and the Montrachet and so forth, they said, yeah, we do this sort of thing. He says, well, we have a chef who specializes in Victorian food. I said, what's his name? Fritz Sonnenschmidt. I said, Sonnenschmidt? He said, yeah, Sonnenschmidt is a top Victorian level chef. So we met Fritz. And at that point, we started to contemplate what a dinner would be like and what it would cost. This is 1974. This is probably before you were born, right?
Not quite.
But you may. It sounds almost unbelievable now. But in 1974, if you went to a restaurant, a very good restaurant, the meal would cost $7, $6, $7, $8. And, now like 90 is nothing anymore, particularly, in places like New York.
Right.
And it jumped over the years. So we knew that this wouldn't be cheap, but we didn't want to really price people out. And when we looked at the scope of the sort of foods that would have to be introduced, Rosenthal said, well, this isn't going to be cheap. How much do you want to spend per person? And I said, well, an average meal is like $7, $8. I guess maybe we could go to 12, which is very, very high. Most people wouldn't imagine having a $12 meal in 1974. It would be really, if you went to the Four Seasons, it might be $11, $12, $13, $14.
Yeah.
And Rosenthal, he says no. He says there's no way we can do this with those kinds of foods. He says, let me look at the list of food. He looks at it, he says, well, prawns, no, we cannot get rid of the prawns. No, we have to keep the prawns. The salmon, no, we have to keep the salmon. The Montrachet, no, we cannot serve anything but the Montrachet. That won't work. And the next thing you know, I think he took out green peas. And he did the whole thing, and it was for $12, which was very, very high, but it was colossal.
But probably they lost money on that.
Yeah, they probably lost money.
Yeah,
because
he was very generous with us.
Yeah. They had 20 or 30 chefs working on it, and dozens of students. I'll show you the menu of the first one. I could show you now or at some other time, so you'll get an idea of the scope of what they did. And then they brought in the ice carving team, and they did ice carvings, and these are master sculptures. Ice carving of the Coach and Four in ice. They did Holmes in marzipan. That's the sort of things that they produce all, well beyond whatever we could pay. But it became a form of artistry at that point.
Well, yeah. I mean, it sounds like it was a challenge for them, a professional challenge.
I think that's what
it was.
They loved it.
Yes.
And they had fun with it.
Yes.
Right?
That's exactly.
Yes.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So how quickly after this first dinner did the cookbook come together?
2 years.
2 years, okay.
And I guess everything is sort of accelerated. But at the end of that dinner, somebody said, there ought to be a cookbook. So I said, well, I had left Vassar looking for a project. Not really looking for a project. The project sort of came to me. I said, yeah, this is good. Fritz, would you like to work on it? He said, sure. So, I buried myself in the library reading about we were lucky in a way. I would never want to do Nero Wolfe, for example. But there were very few specific foods mentioned in the canon. Mm. So it was up to us to discover what they would have been. So you have time of day, place, region, and finding out what people ate in different parts of Britain.
Season.
And so I would come with these ideas of what would have been eaten, and Fritz would arrive at the house with a yellow pad, and next thing I know, he'd written a recipe for it. Mm. And then if we had the ingredients handy, he would go into the kitchen and cook it.
So Fritz Sonnenschmidt at the time was one of the leading chefs, not only in the country, but in the world. And he was either the first or second American to get the title Master Chef, Meister Chef. Mm-hmm. Surely within the first 5 or so. And he had a reputation that extended quite far. And when we learned about Fritz, then I contacted him, and I told Julie that we're going to meet Fritz. I said, I invited Fritz here. Maybe. She said, you did what? So
pressure's on.
Oh my goodness. So I think we decided, well, let's be careful here. So we did a cookout outdoors because, oh my. Yeah, right.
And I made a salad that he really liked. So I said, we learned about Fritz, you don't have to be pretentious with Fritz. You just
now,
order. Yeah.
Were you much of a cook yourself before this?
Probably medium. You know, I enjoyed cooking, but I wasn't too into it as much as I became.
Okay. Well, Julie has imagination, and now it's turned to phenomenal cuisine. We dine from out of the garden. Comes out of the garden, and we eat fresh stuff in the garden almost every day at this time. So, yes, Julie's imaginative.
We're almost vegetarian in the summer.
Yeah. We'll show you the garden.
Yeah. So, do you still use any of the cooking with Sherlock Holmes recipes or dining with Sherlock Holmes recipes in your regular
Occasionally,
cuisine?
no. We're generally on to new and different things.
Yeah.
But I have some favorites, yes. Yeah.
So what are some of your favorites?
I especially love the chicken pie.
Chicken pie.
Yeah. I just love the way the flavors go together. But, we're on to new challenges.
Yeah.
Culinary.
How about you, Al? You have a favorite out of the cookbook?
What is the chicken Murillo was a favorite.
That's my favorite too. Chicken breast Murillo. Yeah. The first time I had that, it was actually prepared buffet style at a dinner at Gillette Castle, where I think both of you were in attendance.
Yes.
And they served it almost casserole style with the noodles and the diced up chicken breasts all mixed together with the shallots and the cream sauce and all the rest.
Yes.
And I remember trying that, and of course the big headline was, "This is from the Sherlock Holmes cookbook," right? Yeah. And Julie's here tonight.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, that's great.
I still remember that. It must have been the late 80s or so, which was how I got my start in Connecticut with Tyke and Teddy.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
Remind us that we're gonna give you some menus so you have an idea of the scope.
Yeah.
Of the planning that it took for Fritz and Julie to put on one of these dinners, which is why it was done every 5 years, because it takes months to plan.
Yeah.
And every 5 years seemed about right. It turned out to be not exactly every 5 years, but I think we did 7 in all, roughly every 5 years or so.
And there will not be another one, because when Fritz retired, we realized that there was nobody else we wanted to work with. That's the story.
Is it something that you would pass on to the next generation and kind of give them the template for doing if somebody else wanted to take up the mantle and find a new master chef to do this kind of thing?
I think it'd be unaffordable because Fritz was able to enlist 15 top chefs to help him out because they were having fun and they were his buddies. And Fritz would say to 40 students, let's get the ice carving team going. If we tried to go to the CIA or a place like it today, they will tell you that, sure, $250 a head.
You don't think we could do it for $12?
Not for $12 without a gun.
Well, it went up considerably. But,
but until we got through, I think we were...
I think there's no...
We tried to...
I think that no one will take it up.
Yeah.
The last time, we tried to keep it under 100. So the last time, I think last time was what, maybe 10 years ago? 12 years ago. I think we said, let's do it for $95, with all the embellishments. I think was it the last one where they had and each time, they try to outdo themselves as well.
It was the Baskerville, so it would be 2001.
They had a pig.
15 years ago.
A whole pig out there, rotating on a spit.
Wow.
Because they, each time they wanted to outdo themselves.
Right.
Yes. We're now talking about, I think one of the last ones dealt with the English Civil War.
Yeah.
Right.
How did the Baskervilles?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the theme of it.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you which one was the most memorable, but it sounds like each successive one became the better.
Oh,
yes.
They were all memorable. The first, of course, was unique because it was the first. The second was the publication party of the book, and we had writers there from the New Yorker, and they were really it was sort of celebrity, and it was introducing the book, and that was a phenomenal event. Henrik Hertzberg wrote it up in the New Yorker. We still have the piece. He did the talk of the town. And he describes Julie, and he describes Fritz, and he describes what it was like to be at that dinner. Then we would have, in 1991, it was the Reichenbach dinner with all the Reichenbach accoutrements. 95, there will always be.
It's always when it's
95, always 1895 was 1995, and so forth. Each one had a slightly different theme.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about ASH and BSI. Mm-hmm. So you started going to the BSI weekend in the early 70s, 73, 74, around there.
Yeah.
And it must have been pretty quickly apparent that the BSI was stag, men only.
Apparent from the beginning, yes.
How did you find out about ASH when Al was busy talking to Julian?
Well, it happened to be about the time that ASH revived itself. So I was sort of part of that. I did not go to their first revival dinner because I had plans with somebody else, but I went the second year. I started going, and the ASH started growing, and so I became part of that. And as ASH began growing, Betsy started growing up. And they started to take her under the wing, making sure that she sat at the rowdy table.
Good call.
Yes.
They're such good mothers there, making sure that the brood is getting exactly what it needs. That's wonderful. So how quickly before you were given your ASH investiture? And what is your ASH investiture?
Maud Bellamy.
Maud Bellamy from Lion's Mane.
Yes.
Any particular reason for that selection?
Yes, because Sherlock Holmes fell in love with her.
Nice. How that's appropriate. There you go.
It's a cover. Maud Bellamy and Julie's article describing Holmes's true love was a cover of BSM. I'm sure it's in your collection.
Yes.
If you look at it, you'll find Maud Bellamy and the real truth.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's a good one to research.
She just debunked all this Irene Adler business and proved otherwise.
Yeah. So you received your investiture in the BSI as
Inspector Bradstreet.
Inspector Bradstreet in 1974.
74. And Julian had always had a nice touch for naming people. I was an assistant DA at the time. No, I was the DA at the time, but he thought it worked out quite nicely.
Yeah.
I think Andy Peck is Inspector Baines, and he ties it in somewhat with your day job calling.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Yeah. So, what are some of your memories of Julian? You both know him, right?
Both know him. He was a very gracious gentleman, and he's very generous also. You know, he hosted the cocktail party
at his own apartment.
At his own apartment. And then when it got too big, he hosted at the Grolier Club at his expense.
It's amazing.
And there was a considerable amount of concern because he was a man of modest means. So a group of men met in the men's room of the Grolier Club, really to sort of advise Julian on this. And they called themselves the Men's Room Committee. Julian, of course, would have none of this sort of advice. He wanted to host it. He hosted it. He was a lovely person. What else do you remember?
I was of a later generation than Julian. Julian's generation was the elder Tom Sticks, Andy Anderson, Bill Jenkins, maybe Baron Gould, Vincent Starrett. That would have been a generation. Ours was the next generation, so to speak. And the class of 74 at the BSI investiture was Mike Whalen and I, and Phil Schreffler and John Lellenberg. Those were the four.
Yeah.
It was an interesting year. So this was sort of the new kids on the block. So I wasn't, close chums with Julian because he was somewhat older. He was in a different circle. And at that point, it had become apparent that a lot of Julian's friends were falling away. And Julian would cling on to his old friends like Andy and Bill Jenkins. But we got to know Julian a little bit. He was very gracious. George Fletcher was sort of I don't think he was not in Julian's generation, but he was very close to Julian and a little bit protective of Julian. And that's a role that George played as he was publisher of the Baker Street Journal.
Right.
And was the link to the Grolier Club.
One thing that may not immediately spring to mind when you think of the Baker Street Journal is relationships. If this is the foremost publication about Sherlockian scholarship since 1946, where do relationships come in? Well, first, there's the relationship that you have with the stories. When we take the complete Sherlock Holmes off the shelf and select a story, we do so deliberately, because of a fond memory of years before, or perhaps a yearning to reacquaint ourselves with some of the plots. Then, there's the relationship between Holmes and Watson, of course. Christopher Morley called it a textbook of friendship, and he was right. Over the course of some 4 decades, we saw the special relationship that these two friends and colleagues shared, and we were the richer for it. But there's also a hidden relationship within the pages of the Baker Street Journal. It's the camaraderie that you share with other Sherlockians around the world who also subscribe, knowing that you're learning from the same insightful articles, sharing a chuckle over a comic, or discovering hidden aspects of the stories that were heretofore unknown to you. So make sure you visit BakerStreetJournal.com today and place an order for a subscription. It could be for you, or it could be for a budding Sherlockian. At only $41.95 a year, it's a bargain for anyone who wants to be transported to another world. After all, what's a relationship worth to you?
And of course, we had known Julian and had a lot of conversations with him, but one conversation stands out in my mind that we repeated often when we were chatting with Julian, and Julian said, "There's so much being written now about Sherlock Holmes." He was speaking, of course, of the John Bennett Shaw era, when John Bennett Shaw brought a whole new life into the movement, so to speak. And it was during that era where more and more was being written about Sherlock, a whole new wave. And Julian said, "There's so much being written about Sherlock Holmes, it's now becoming impossible to tell the difference between fact and fiction." And we thought that was so great. And he said it in his wry demeanor.
Yeah.
Of course. And I just thought, I probably, spit out the wine I was drinking at the time, with a great belly laugh.
That's great.
But he in his wry, impish way, and we've repeated that so often, what is out there? It's impossible to tell fact from fiction anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Don't you feel that way, Scott, sometimes? But where's the line?
I mean, to me, having come into the Sherlockian movement in the late 80s, it's always been like that. There are a great many people that I've spoken with who express great shock that Sherlock Holmes wasn't a real person.
Yes.
That's indeed they should.
What? But it seems so real. Exactly, right?
There you go.
So, one of the great things that Tom Sticks brought to the Irregulars after Julian's passing was bringing women into the BSI.
Yes.
When Julian was still with us, did you have any sense that he was conflicted about the position of the BSI, that it wouldn't allow women? Or was that, with Julian, was that just it, and there wasn't going to be anything done about it?
Not that I know of. Julian was a steward, as far as Julian was concerned. He was a steward of what had been.
Okay. So he didn't want to really disrupt anything, but he wanted to
correct
maintain it and protect it. so to speak.
That's how I see Julian.
So I don't know that conflicted would be the operative word. Like most people, Julian was the product of his times. And in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, the thought of the introduction of women in the BSI really hadn't been seriously considered. But as the country changed and as the world changed, with Julian's passing, another generation came in, and there was talk starting around the edges. Julian sort of lightly dismissed the picketing by the folks who turned out to be the Ashes, who are now stalwart irregulars. I think he dismissed it maybe with a wave of a hand or maybe a laugh, but did not, I don't think, consider it as a serious threat or one that should bring about the introduction of women into the BSI. It was just there, and that was that. By the time of Tom Stix's era, there was enough rumbling that Tom was undoubtedly conflicted, as many other people were in his shoes. People in all manner of leadership positions, the Navy, the Senate, everywhere else, the colleges, this is all going on. Right. And surely Tom Stix was a part of that. So then it comes to our, how we reacted to that, because I shared some of that conflict. Yeah. And in my line of work, in the judiciary and in the law, it was not suffered lightly. The exclusion was not suffered lightly, because you want to believe that the judiciary is going to be sensitive and responsive toward notions of equality and toward advances in equality. It didn't bother Julie at all. And Julie never said, "Oh, you're going to that again? I mean, how can you go to that sexist organization?" That never crossed her lips or her mind. Hers, have a good time, boys will be boys. There was no banging on the door, banging the drum. There was none of that. She just said, "Go and have a good time." And she let it go with that. But I became increasingly uncomfortable with that setup. And I guess we'll describe what happened. Right?
Well, it's your story, but Al had written a letter to Tom saying he could no longer attend BSI functions as long as it excluded women.
Wow.
And I said, Al, don't mail it. This is going to reflect badly on me. Don't mail it. So Al said, well, I'll hold it for a while. He actually still has the letter.
People are going to... Julie felt that people are going to say that she instigated it, right. Instigated the letter, which was not the case. So I had the letter. Julie said, don't mail it, and I did not mail it. But...
Do you still have it?
I think if I had to find it, I think I could. And it was by then it was 1991, so that's 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And then I at that time had enough stature in the BSI, so to speak. I wasn't like the newest kid on the block where I could say, Tom, I'd like to chat with you. Can we go to breakfast together? Which we did at the Williams Club. Had breakfast with Tom. This would have been 1991. And I said, Tom, this has been on my mind. I'm sure you're not unaware that there's some rumblings about excluding women, and that and Julie has nothing to do with this. Julie hasn't instigated this. It comes from me, but I have. I don't feel as though I can attend dinners anymore as long as this regime continues to exclude women. And I didn't know what his reaction was going to be. I was a little bit apprehensive because I was a little bit worried. I didn't know whether he'd, grab me by the neck and throw me out of the Williams Club, or whether he'd applaud, or how he would react, or whether I would be influencing him, or whether I'd be turning him negative. And I didn't know, but I just felt as though, I kind of wanted to say what I said. And he would have been a great poker player because he was totally expressionless. I couldn't tell how he was reacting to it, how he was taking it in. He's just sitting, drinking his coffee. He wasn't nodding, up and down. He wasn't nodding sideways. He just said nothing. We then turned to another topic. We said, okay, see you later, and that was that.
He didn't verbally respond to you or say he'd take under advisement or anything like that?
If he did, it would have been something so neutral that it wouldn't have changed the impression of a total sphinx.
Wow.
Unbeknownst to me, that night, we're sitting there at the afternoon. Was it in the afternoon?
It was at the
cocktail party, right?
Was it? Yeah. Oh, I forgot. It was a cocktail party. Okay. That afternoon, unbeknownst to me and totally unexpected, he began to announce the investitures. And the investitures were, I think it started with Dame Jean Conan Doyle and then Julie. And I was just blown away. I couldn't believe it. And I thought, this guy just sat there and he stared at me and said not a word. Yeah. How great was that?
That is amazing. And do you remember that you must remember that afternoon, right?
I remember it very, very well. I remember where I was standing at the time. I was standing next to George Fletcher, who had just told me that my book had sold 10,000 copies. And then Tom started to speak, and we both listened. And Al was in another part of the room socializing. See, the book was not the Bobbs Merrill edition. It was the Fordham Press edition that had just come out.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was I think in your introduction, Scott, you asked us to think of one moment. I think that day, when it began with breakfast with Tom Sticks and with Julie's investiture, was, I think, if we had to pick one standout day.
Yes.
That's pretty amazing.
It was not only a personal thing, it was almost, it was a sociological thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And highly personal. And also, it introduced itself in the world of Baker Street, which was very dear to us.
Right. And the two of you really made history because you were the first members of the Florin Society, the Sherlockian spouses who each received an investiture.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we were the first. Well, I guess we would have to have been.
Yeah. We would be the first, yes.
Wayne Sticks and
Francine.
Yeah.
And Tyke and Teddy.
Sure.
And Dick and Francine Kitts.
Right.
There's a few of them.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
But you were the first.
Well,
yes.
I guess we had to have been in that whoever was on the first list, whatever women were on the first list. So that was Dame Jean and Julie, Susan Rice,
and
Evie,
Ed Herzog, Catherine McMahon.
Catherine McMahon, who may have been one of the first Baker Street, one of the initial Baker Street Irregulars.
That's true. The solver of the puzzle, right?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on definition.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's remarkable. So you had Julian, who was the steward, right? You had Tom, who was transformative.
Yes.
Right, but a steward as well. I think all the members, the leaders of the BSI, are stewards in their own right.
Transformative.
And then Mike Whalen came on board in '96.
Yes.
What would you say? How would you categorize Mike's role as the leader of the BSI?
Mike is expanding its role and its stature. That's how I'd see him. He's expanded its reach through the publications, through events like Chautauqua coming up. So I see him as somebody who's just expanding the reach of the BSI without expanding the BSI itself. How would you see him?
Well, when you consider that going way back, to Morley and then Edgar Smith and Julian would type the Baker Street Journal with his own typewriter. And if you look at some of the early Baker Street Journal, you can see it's a hand typewriter with different keys and so forth and so on. And it was basically Julian's little operation with all of his pals. And as you said, Tom Sticks was transformative. By the time Mike Whalen arrived on the scene as the head of the Baker Street Irregulars, it was no longer a little club. It was a movement. It was a weekend that began sort of Friday night, extended to Saturday, then to Sunday, then to Thursday, then to Wednesday. And there were so many subgroups that Mike with a corporate background began to have almost like 9 vice presidents, each one in charge of this and that, and there's no other way to do it. And fortunately, Mike does have a corporate background, so Mike began to delegate. So Mike, and I don't know that he wants to be known or necessarily should be known as the great delegator, but it did take on a much greater expanse in which a lot of the responsibilities were put out to other people because it would be impossible for any single person to run it all. It would be.
No way could he type all these publications on his own typewriter.
No.
So Mike has.
I don't think he can type period. So.
If we started, Scott, to list them all in corporate terms, not that he uses corporate terms, we could probably identify 15 vice presidents, don't you think?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think Mike in some ways would regard himself as a steward of the organization, but it's also, to your point, an expansion of the organization. And he's supported that expansion with the infrastructure necessary to keep it running.
Right.
Not to mention Marianne.
Not to mention what?
Marianne.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Executive Vice President.
You said it.
Yes.
Wow.
Wrapping up here, just a couple of final questions. What do you do when you're not doing Sherlockian things? What are your other hobbies?
What are other hobbies besides gardening, yard work, skiing?
Are you still active skiers?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. We were, for a number of years, ski instructors. We don't do that anymore, but we still avid skiers. Al plays squash. I'm becoming obsessed with Chinese martial arts. So,
Wow. That's amazing.
You
find yourselves busier now than ever?
Yes, Sherlock Holmes is not our only obsession, I guess.
Yeah.
And you'll see our garden later.
Yeah.
It provides most of our nutritional needs for the summer.
That's wonderful.
Which means we eat a lot of kale.
So what are you looking forward to most in the Sherlockian world, or, what's next?
We did write a couple of books together on a totally unrelated topic. Yes. It's possible that in the books we may have smuggled in a footnote on Sherlock just for the cognoscente. We always do that. So when we write a book, if we write a book on some totally unrelated subject, we have a footnote in there that someone like Peter Blau will find. So we did one on Dutch New York. We, like many other people, realized around 2007, which was the 400th anniversary of Henry Hudson's trip up the river that bears his name, that we live in the Hudson Valley and the Hudson is our river, and it was the 400th anniversary, and we came to understand that while we've been British since 1664 in New York, we had 50 years where we were Dutch, and our basement and ground floor were basically Dutch. So we did some history on that, and we wrote a book about, or I should say collected a number of articles of different facets of life in Dutch New York, and that was a nice enterprise. Did we bring in Sherlock in that? I don't remember if we managed to smuggle him into a footnote.
Yeah, I don't remember.
It's almost, in a way, it sounds, not to be pretentious, it sounds almost like Hitchcock, injecting himself into
Sure.
Just to smuggle Sherlock in there somewhere. Probably we did, in some footnote or other, that the ordinary reader would just glance right over it, but the Peter Blaus of the world would clap on it, right?
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So what's the book? You brought one out.
This is another one. The book was the history, basically the history of Dutch New York. It's called Opening Statements, which is sort of a play on words, because lawyers make opening statements, and this was the opening statement of Europeans being in the Middle Atlantic, particularly in New York. So that's been around for a while, and we did it for the Historical Society of the New York Courts. It's been a lot of fun. And just as we have a Sherlock, one foot in the Sherlock world, we have friends in the historical world of New York history and related areas of interest. And we did a book on historic courthouses. Those are the only lot of we've written a number of articles together, but the two books were those two books, right?
Yes.
So that's distinct enough, I think, from Sherlock to have another, somewhat of another life. And our daughter captures a lot of our interest, of course, in her world of copyrights and trademarks and patents, about which I know next to nothing. I think it's probably safer to say nothing. So that's another avenue.
Yeah.
And watching her advance in that universe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what a wonderful life you've created together. Shared interests, shared friends.
Yes.
It seems like it's just a joy to be part of this.
Yeah, we're lucky.
Scott, you put your finger on something so important by mentioning friends just now. And it's funny that it just came to you, I guess because it was natural that it would come to you that way. But there's a phrase that started going around the Sherlockian world that most people understand to attribute to Julie, which was?
It started with Sherlock Holmes, but now it's about friendship.
Isn't that great?
That's so true.
And Mike has repeated that. He attributes it to Julie, of course, and you the same.
Yes. That's true.
So we do value our friends like you and Mike and the BSI people.
Yeah.
At this point, truth be told, the stories are, of course, important, but we're there to see friends.
Of course.
Of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you for inviting me into your home and for sharing your wonderful stories with us.
I am so sorry I couldn't join you. I had planned, as you know, to be there with you.
Wait, you weren't there?
No.
It was such a large living room, I didn't notice.
I know. You thought I was parking the car.
I wondered why you were so quiet the last hour.
I was just stunned. But I was really sorry not to be able to be there because I remember that very first CIA dinner. And in fact, after listening to the interview, I went over to my bookshelf and found a copy of Dining with Sherlock Holmes, a Baker Street cookbook by Julia Rosenblatt and Frederick H. Sonnenschmidt.
Oh, that's a nice one, yeah.
It is. Well, I opened it up and I said to myself, boy, how unfortunate that I never got Julie to sign this. And then I went over to my bookshelf and I found this copy of Dining with Sherlock Holmes, which goes back to the Fordham University Press and that dinner in I think that was the last one in 2001. Although I don't know. Oh yes, no, this must be the Hound interview because it had in the menu. I don't know if you've seen this. It had a really nice poem by Lou Lewis about the Hound of the Baskervilles. Yes, May 12th, 2001. So it was just great to spend some time with them. I'm only sorry I couldn't have been there.
Well, I don't have that edition, I don't think. Let me see. Because they did send me away with a number of goodies when I was at the home. The first menu, and I'm going to try and take some pictures.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
On the show notes, but it's a menu that is, I don't know what size this would be. Probably like an 11 by.
It's huge, yeah.
11 by 14 kind of size. And then I've got the.
Did you get the last menu, the menu for the Hound dinner?
I don't have the Hound one. I have a wonderful one from 1987.
Oh, how beautiful!
I have one from 1995. I have this one from. What's this? This is the third one in 1982. So I don't think they had the final menu there.
Oh, the final menu. So have you ever? So what is your thinking about Sherlock Holmes and food? Are there Sherlockian dishes that you actually? Because you're a cook. I mean, we both cook a bit.
Well, as I mentioned in the interview there with Al and Julie, one of the dishes I first experienced from the cookbook, and it probably would have been around 1987 or so, was at Gillette Castle. It was the
Oh, the chicken.
The chicken dish there.
Oh, you mentioned that.
The San Pedro chicken breast.
Murillo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A Murillo, if you are in language. It was served as a casserole, but I've made it here, and it is by far my favorite dish. And it's very simple. It's chicken, it's shallots, it's butter, it's cream, everything that'll kill you, and and served over buttered noodles. It's a very simple yet elegant dish, and I've made it again and again. So you will not find a cooking light with Sherlock Holmes cookbook out there.
No.
Fortunately.
No.
Because nobody in Victorian times really understood the value of light cooking, of easing back on the calories. In fact, it was quite the opposite. You wanted to load up on those calories, so when you were out and about, food was not as simple to come by as we know it today, with Chipotle and McDonald's and all the rest being on every available street corner.
Yes.
People had to sustain themselves throughout the day when they were out and about.
It was before the wonders of chemistry gave us great things like Twinkies.
Or now, deep-fried Twinkies available in your freezer section. Try them today. Well, lest we expire ourselves, I suppose this is we've gotten about as far as we can off the beaten trail for Sherlock Holmes. So this is the time for us to sadly say, you are Burt Wolder.
Yes, my goodness, I've been recognized. And you, I know that boyish grin, that's Scott Monty.
I do what I can. And that means together we say,
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.